Chairman wish to speak, I'll be glad to wait until the chairman is. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment, call up amendment number 3475.
The objection is heard.
I understand that is the process right now, and I, however, will discuss the amendment. It's very simple, and it would place a moratorium on all earmarks in years in which there's a deficit. I'm pleased to be joined in this effort by my good friend from Indiana, Senator Bayh, and I thank him for his leadership and courage on this issue. And I'm sure I don't need to remind my colleagues about our nation's fiscal situation, but let's review the facts anyway. Just this morning, the Treasury Department announced that the government racked up a record high monthly budget deficit of $220.9 billion last month. We now have a deficit of over $1.4 trillion and a debt of over $12.5 trillion. I recently have seen a bumper sticker around Arizona that says, "Please don't tell the president what comes after a trillion." Unemployment remains close to 10%, and according to Forbes.com, a record 2.8 million American households were threatened with foreclosure last year, and that number is expected to rise well over 3 million homes this year. Even with all of this, we continue to spend and spend and spend. Every time we pass an appropriations bill with increased spending and load it up with earmarks, we're robbing future generations of their ability to attain the American dream, and I believe that that's immoral. That's why I've been pleased and somewhat surprised over the last several days to hear about the renewed bipartisan interest in banning earmarks. I'm thankful for the attention, and I welcome the Democratic House leadership to the fight against earmarks. According to today's Washington Post, I quote, "Facing an election year backlash over runaway spending and ethics scandals, House Democrats moved Wednesday to ban earmarks for private companies, sparking a war between the parties over which would embrace the most dramatic steps to change the way business is done in Washington." And I applaud the Democrats in the other body for this step. It's a small step, but it's a step in the right direction. As House Appropriations Committee Chairman Obey pointed out, the fiscal year 2010 budget included more than 1,000 earmarks for private companies. So the effect of the moratorium proposed by the other body would be a reduction of about 1,000 earmarks. The problem with this is that there were over 9,000 earmarks loaded onto just one of the bills we passed last year. According to Taxpayers for Common Sense, last year's earmarks funded by Congress but not requested by the administration totaled $15.9 billion. So we spent $15.9 billion on earmarks while we are facing the highest national debt in history. Additionally, according to since World War II as a percent of gross national product. Additionally, according to today's Congressional Quarterly, and I quote, "There are several significant catches to the House Democrats' earmark moratorium. They note, and I quote, if a program is not formally considered an earmark according to congressional rules, for instance, it could escape any ban. Billions of dollars in spending for the defense industry could end up slipping through that caveat alone, analysts say, and so why am I not surprised?" Thankfully, my friends in the House Republican caucus recognize the fact that the Speaker's proposal did little to seriously address the problem, so they upped the ante and voted unanimously to impose an across-the-board earmark ban on their conference. I congratulate Mr. Boehner and especially Congressman Flake of Arizona for taking this bold step. It was the right thing to do. Unfortunately, the newfound zeal for attacking earmarks is not shared by their Senate counterparts. According to today's Congressional Quarterly, I quote, "Senate Democrats signaled that they would not follow suit, even as senior House Republicans responded that all earmarks should be banned." And Congressional Quarterly also noted that it's not clear where Majority Leader Harry Reid stands. His office declined to comment on the House appropriations move, but the Senate appropriators' opposition does not bode well for a ban's prospect in that body. Again, I'm not surprised. The Washington Post article I cited earlier also noted that, and I quote, "The latest earmark reform efforts follow a wave of investigations focusing on House appropriators' actions. The Justice Department has looked into the earmarking activities of several lawmakers, and relying on public documents, the House Ethics Committee investigated 5 Democrats and 2 Republicans on the Appropriations Defense Subcommittee, finding that the lawmakers steered more than $245 million to clients of a lobbying firm under federal criminal investigations. The lawmakers collected more than $840,000 in political contributions from the firm's lobbyists and clients in a little more than 2 years." The battle over earmarks has been waged over many years. I have been engaged in it for 20 years, and I am under no illusions that it will end anytime soon. I was encouraged in January 2007 when the Senate passed, by a vote of 96-2, an ethics and lobbying reform package which contained real, meaningful earmark reforms. I believed that at last we would finally enact some effective reforms. Unfortunately, that victory was short-lived. In August 2007, some 8 months later, we were presented with a bill containing very watered-down earmark provisions and doing far too little to rein in wasteful earmarks and pork barrel spending. And I find myself encouraged by what I've heard over the last several days, but I've been around here long enough to know not to get my hopes up. I don't look at this as being cynical, just practical. Let's take a look at some of the things we've spent hundreds of billions of taxpayers' dollars on over the last several years. $165,000 for maple syrup research in Vermont, $150,000 for the Polynesian Voyaging Society in Honolulu, $250,000 for Turtle Observer funding, $500,000 for the Bellevue Arts Museum in Washington, $2 million for the algae research in Washington, $500,000, one of my all-time favorites, comes back all the time, $500,000 to the National Wild Turkey Federation in Nebraska, $799,000 for soybean research, $349,000 for pig waste management in North Carolina, $819,000 for catfish genome research in Alabama, $250,000 for gypsy moth research in New Jersey, $1 million for potato research at Oregon State University, and the list goes, $250,000 earmark for the Iowa Vitality Center at Iowa State University. The list goes on and on. And for over 20 years, I've fought vigorously against the wasteful practice of earmarking. The fight has been a lonely one and hasn't won me friends in this town over the years. It's an important fight, and I'm confident that in the end, the opponents of this practice will be victorious. The corruption which stems from earmarking has resulted in current and former members of both the House and the Senate either under investigation, under indictment, or in prison. Again, I was pleased to see that the Speaker of the House and the Chairman of the House Appropriations Committee have recognized earmarks for what they really are: a corrupting influence that should not be tolerated in these times of fiscal crisis or ever. I applaud my Republican colleagues in the House and Senate, especially Senators Coburn and DeMint, who have called for a year-long moratorium on all earmarks. I fully support and join them in those efforts, but I also think we need to do more. We need a complete ban on earmarks until our budget is balanced and we've eliminated our massive deficit. This amendment, if considered, and I will make it considered at one point or another, will have a proposal to do just that, and I encourage my colleagues to join me in this effort. It's what the American people want, and we have an obligation to give it to them. We as members of Congress owe it to the American people to conduct ourselves in a way that reinforces rather than diminishes the public's faith and confidence in Congress. An informed citizenry is essential to a thriving democracy, and a democratic government operates best in the disinfecting light of the public eye. By seriously addressing the corrupting influence of earmarks, we will allow members to legislate with the imperative that our government must be free from corrupting influences, both real and perceived. We must act now to ensure that the erosion we see today in the public's confidence in Congress does not become a complete collapse of faith in our institutions. We can and we must end the practice of earmarking. Now, I have traveled around the country and all around my home state of Arizona. I have seen the Tea Party participants. I have met citizens of my state who have never, ever been involved in the political process before. They are angry and they are frustrated and they want change. They want the change that was promised them last November, which they haven't gotten. They want us to act as careful stewards of their tax dollars. Just the other night, my colleague from Arizona and I, Senator Kyle, were on a teleconference call to the citizens of our state, and many thousands of them were on the call, and we responded to their questions. And a guy on the phone said, he was from Thatcher, Arizona, and he said, "I've never been involved nor cared much about politics before, but," he said, quote, "you have gotten me off the couch. You've gotten me off the couch." And we've gotten lots of people off the couch because they're saying enough. They're saying enough of a $1.4 trillion debt this year and an increase in that debt for next year of some $1.5 trillion, an accumulated debt of $12.5 trillion. They believe that we've spent too much and we've taxed too much. So I hope that we can send a message by completely banning earmarks and go through the appropriate process for funding of sometimes much-needed projects, and that is the authorization and then appropriation route. Many people believe that I am saying, I and those of us who oppose earmarks, that we are against any projects for anyone's state or much-needed help. It's not the case. What we're saying is that we want any project and expenditure of taxpayers' dollars authorized and then appropriated. That way, by authorizing, the authorizing committees can compare all the virtues or the necessities of every project and match them up against one another, rather than an appropriation being added in the middle of the night that is directly related to a position on the Appropriations Committee or a position of influence rather than merit. We can't afford to continue that practice, which has led to the anger, cynicism of the American people, and also has led over time to the investigation, sometimes indictment, and even incarceration of members of Congress in federal prison. So I urge my colleagues to now stand up and do the right thing, and that is to ban the earmarks, at least until we can tell the American people we have eliminated this debt that we've laid on our children and our grandchildren. Could I say to the chairman of the committee, say to the distinguished chairman, that I did have an amendment on bicycle storage facilities and one other that perhaps at the appropriate time that the chairman will see. I'll be glad to brief him, and his staff would be appropriately in order. Madam Chairman, I suggests the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President,
Senator from West Virginia.
ask unanimous consent